today, the theme of the conference is industry, as in being industrious, as in working hard. And that led me immediately to think, why is this still so hard? Because I've been in the field for a really long time and I'm tired. And I imagine there are a lot of other people who are really tired too. We keep seeing the same problems over and over again. And what can we do about this? So this is what I'm going to talk about. Um, I am on a committee for the National Academy of Sciences to enumerate hard problems in cybersecurity. And we're doing this, list the hard problems that could benefit from more government resources from research, more efforts, this sort of thing. And I can't talk about what is in that report until we deliver it to the White House, which we're supposed to do like in December, but then it'll be public and everybody will see it. So first of all, I don't want anything that I say today to be construed as an opinion of the committee or of the academy or a preview of what's in the report or anything like that. These are just my opinions. But what I can do is talk about the last time somebody tried to do this. They tried to list the hard problems in cyber, and this was in 2005. So we're going to take a look at that list, and I want you to think about whether any of these look familiar. And I'll give you a second to take this in. This is the list that they came up with. Now, a lot of these are very technical, very theoretical, and we've kind of broadened scope since then. But, we've got, can everybody see the slides okay? Just checking. We've got identity management. Does anybody still think this is easy? Insider threat, gosh, when did that come up? Availability, building scalable systems, attack attribution. So let me see a show of hands. Does anybody here think any of these problems have been solved since 2005? Yeah, exactly. And in fact, it's gotten harder. All of these have gotten harder due to increasing complexity, very complex, third-party involvement. The cloud just made everything more complex. You don't have everything running on a box under your desk anymore. And that is, just governance, everything, technically, everything is more complex. We still have really old technology that works just fine, so we're going to keep it, like mainframes. Anybody here still work with a mainframe? Yeah, no, you all are too young. But if you find on a third-party site that your password can only be 6 to 8 characters, you can bet there's a mainframe behind it. And it's not changing, it's not going away. So CISOs have to deal with securing the old technology and everything that is new, up to and including AI. So the tail is just getting longer and longer. There are wider use cases and broader use cases. Everybody is using tech now, from a 3-year-old, to a 103-year-old. And they're using it, we have farmers using tech. We've got artists, doctors, everybody is using tech, not just the technical people who used to do this 20 years ago or 30 years ago. The ripple effects of breaches. The Scientia Institute did a really good set of research reports with Risk Recon, which is a subsidiary of MasterCard, and they tracked how breaches affect other parties. If anybody's heard of the Blackbaud ransomware incident, they estimate that it affected about 1,000 other organizations, a whole lot of them nonprofits, which I call, the other critical infrastructure. Because if nonprofits go down, people don't get fed, the homeless don't have a place to stay, human trafficking victims don't get rescued, anything that you can think of that nonprofits do. If they are attacked, if they go down, their mission is in jeopardy too. So the ripple effects of breaches have gotten bigger and bigger because we all have shared infrastructure now. We have linchpin providers. If you hear about US East 1 going down, that should strike fear into your heart. You know, we never had to worry about that before. And the monetization of data, and yes, ransomware is some of that, but also just advertising data, monetizing that now. Everybody's selling it, and now selling that data for AI training. That makes securing it a lot more complicated. And the kinetic effects of cyber attacks, and I'm not just talking about drones with flamethrowers, although that's pretty cool, but because we're using this tech everywhere, if it's attacked, something goes down. Ask the Lumen guys sometime. What happens when 600,000 routers in the rural Midwest go down and get bricked in the middle of harvest time? So all of that, yeah, it's not good. It's not good. And the problem is we're still doing the same things to solve these problems. We're still addressing them in the same way. And personally, I look at something, and if I see, you know, it's been 20 years and it's not working, you know, why are we still trying this? Isn't that an indicator that maybe we're doing the wrong thing? Maybe we're approaching it wrong, we're thinking about it wrong. So, you know, is this the year of X509 again? Some more? We started this like 30 years ago. It's still there. Awareness training. I have a bug about awareness training. I'm sorry, Jeff. But you know, this is a problem. I'll talk about that. More security spackle, what I call it, on top of gaps in the systems, and security built by non-practitioners. And also, why are we telling everybody that you're on your own? You have to secure yourself. That's a pretty fundamental assumption that may be really wrong. Although, you know, it's the sort of thing that we tend to do in the US because we feel like everybody should be pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, which, by the way, in its initial incarnation as a phrase, it meant trying to do the impossible. Pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, you can't do it. So let's talk about awareness training, especially phishing training. We are still doing this. Why are we doing this? Why are we telling people not to click on things when their job is to click on things? Why are we relying on the detection mechanisms in this fallible organic material in every single person? And I'll tell you a story about phishing training. Used to do this. When I was at one place, we held awareness classes, and they were not mandatory. We had like 25 different awareness training classes, and people could show up whenever they wanted to, and we kept track of who showed up. Speaking of showing up, how nice of you to join us, Mr. English. So you know, we kept track of who showed up in this phishing awareness training. And then we decided to do, well, it's all sorts of security training. And then we decided to do a phishing exercise, and we wanted to see if the people who showed up were more or less likely to click on the links. And you would think that if they'd been trained, we had people who showed up to all 25. They loved our trainings. So we did the exercise, and it turned out the people who came to our trainings were more likely to click on the link. Really? What? What? So the only thing that we could figure out is that the people who showed up really loved security. They loved us. They wanted to help us and everything. And the phishing email said, we need you to help the security team here. Go to this site, click on this link, and put in your password so we can see if it's strong enough. And they said, yes, we're going to do this. So, you know, yeah, it's very hard to do well. It is hard to train an entire dynamic population, and yet we feel like this is the answer. And why don't we just design things so it doesn't matter if they click on the wrong thing? Could we like do that? And I just had to throw this meme in because it's, you know, coming up on Halloween. 80 hours of cyber awareness training. I hate cyber awareness training. I will sit there and go, and all the people I know who have to do it usually just try to find a way that they can hack it so that they don't have to finish watching all the videos. So, you know, okay, you know, good intentions, bad execution. And the other thing that I really hate is the idea that users are the weakest link. I hate that phrase. I do not agree with it. People are not, they are a fluid and dynamic attack surface. It's true, but they are not the weakest link. People can be your best asset when you are trying to do security. If you can train people, we actually determined this with some research that we did on security outcomes. And we found that those who had done role-specific training, security training for their people, had better IR programs. And so if you teach somebody, look, you're in this role, these are the sort of things that you can expect to see if there's a sort of attack. These are the things we need you to report. Here's what we'd like you to do about them. And here are the decisions we're going to trust you to make in your role if you see something like this. Then you have a whole bunch of threat intel just sitting in your organization. And I can't tell you how many times somebody's come into my office and closed the door and said, you know, there's something I think you should know. And that's how it starts. So people are your greatest asset if you treat them that way. Now let's talk about security spackle. You know, somebody asked me one time if I could go back in time and change something about the development of the security industry. I said I would do away with the person who invented antivirus. Because their answer was, oh, yeah, this is, you know, exploiting this vulnerability. Let's just write something else to sit on top of it. Let's not fix the actual code. Let's not fix the actual vulnerability. So the whole industry, a billion dollar industry now, is all built of putting things on top of other things. And it's getting ridiculous. When I was an analyst, you know, I would see all of these vendors all trying to be the top layer of something, one pane of glass, and this. When it got to the point where my colleague, Adrian Sanabria, saw a product that he started describing as a SIM for your SIM, I said, okay, that's it, I'm out, I'm done. So just doing, and we never retire any of these layers either. We just keep building more and more. Sometimes these bits of functionality get acquired and maybe kind of integrated into another vendor's offerings. Maybe they don't, but it's all piecemeal. I did a survey once and asked professionals, I said, let's just say I'm a CISO and it's my first day in a 1,000-person organization that has never done security before. What should I buy? That's it. What should I buy? And some people named like 4 different technologies as a minimum baseline. Some people named 31 different technologies. And you can bet that the people who answered that were people at banks because you can afford to buy one of everything. Michael Dell actually told me that they have like 75 different security products in their portfolio. And I've done workshops on how do you consolidate, how do you retire some of those. So we're creating a lot of the complexity ourselves. The other thing I really hate is vulnerability management. I just call it scanning and scolding, because it is really easy to go through and say, oh, you missed a spot. So, you know, apologies to all the red teamers out there, I'm sorry, but that is the easy part, figuring out how to break something. Now, figuring out how to fix it or build it securely in the first place, that is a real challenge. And I would encourage you, if you know, as you think about your next career moves, please try to work on that side, because almost all of the products that I see are built on doing the things that are easy to detect, not easy to remediate. If you can figure out how to remediate something, not automatically because nobody will trust that, but if you can figure out how to solve the remediation problem, then you will get, well, a personal Nobel Prize from me at the very least. And then talking about patching, I cannot tell you how many researchers who have never actually tried to defend an enterprise just say, just patch. Why don't they patch? They need to patch faster. What if you can't? What if you cannot patch? This is a picture of, this is an actual picture of some of the infrastructure that I have in my old house in Austin that my husband set up. Look at this guy. Look at this yellow guy right here. You see how, you know how old that hardware is because of how yellow it has gotten. And, you know, there's just all, and it's just piled up. There's just all sorts of stuff. There is old stuff in everywhere because it is still working. A lot of people think of tech as furniture. They will buy something, and as long as it continues to work, you know, they're not going to swap out a chair every year just for security reasons. I mean, ask the Black Lotus Labs, Lumen guys, what happens to a small office, home office router when it goes out of support? Better yet, just go see their talk at 1 o'clock. Yeah, those Soho routers can be taken over entirely by the bad guys for nefarious purposes. And in a lot of cases, the users are not going to notice because the router's still working. It's working just fine. Why would they care? But they cannot patch if those routers have been declared end of support or end of life by the vendor. They're stuck unless they buy another piece of furniture, which to them is furniture. We're going to have to buy another. Why do we have to buy another one? This one is working fine. So that is a really big problem. Now, security built by non-practitioners. This is something else. We have a whole industry of people who professionally build things, but they build based on what's going to sell as opposed to what is actually going to work. And this is, I'm going to illustrate this with an example. Here we go. All right. Has anybody seen one of these before? I have a picture of it up here in case you can't really see. This is, in German, this is called a Latthammer. And it is, this belonged to my father-in-law. And yes, you can build these sort of things, but I'll tell you that I sat on YouTube and listened to a whole YouTube in German by actual workers and carpenters who reviewed the make and the different brands and makes of this kind of hammer. And they talked about things that you would not intuitively know if you were not a carpenter or a roofer, because that's what this is used for. So I'll tell you a few things that I learned about how this is used. So this really scary looking part, this is for people who come in late. No, this is used by roofers. First of all, this pike and this point right here is used to put holes in slate tiles so that you can then hammer them in. Using the wrong hand. So that you can hammer them in. It is also used to, if you are working with wood, and let's say one of your hands is busy, you can grab the next board, wang this in here, and pull the board towards you by just whacking it in there. Or if you need to park the hammer for something, because you need both hands for something, you can just wang it in there and park it in the wood. But another thing I learned is that doing that, parking it, leaving it parked in the wood is also a sign for, I'm going to take a break now, I need a beer. You want to come join me? So, and other things, you might notice the channel at the top. This is where you can put a nail and set it. The newer hammers have magnets for this. So you can set the nail and then start hammering it. Again, if you're holding something with your other hand, you only have one hand free. The head, as you can see, is squared off. This is so you can get it into really tight corners. And it is also textured so that it is less likely to slip off of the head of the nail while you're hammering. But wait, there's more. They talked on and on about the weight of the hammer, where it balances. Let me see if I can balance this guy. It's important where it balances, what it's made out of, because if it is too light, first of all, you're going to get tired if you're doing this all day, because you can't use the weight to help you if there's no weight there. You don't want it to be certain materials that will transmit vibrations when you're hitting something, because that can also be bad for your arm. And then the grip is really important, what it's made out of and how it handles when you are sweating or when you are working in the rain, when it gets wet. And then also the neck right here, they talked about how important it was to keep in mind that when you miss, and you will, if you hit this part of the neck, it should not get damaged enough so that eventually the head of the hammer just falls off. So all of these things are things that carpenters know, but that tool makers don't necessarily know. And this is the problem with our industry, is that just all these use cases that I talked about right here, this isn't even all of the use cases for any given product. And if you are a vendor and you just send out a survey to your users, first of all, surveys are really hard to get right. But secondly, they have to be short because people don't like filling out long surveys. So there's only so much you can ask them, and it will be tainted by what you understand about the use cases of what you're making. And so you can't just go ask your customer base what they need and then build it. If you think you can sell it, if your VC or your investor thinks that you can sell it that way and you can make money, there are lots of things that you have to intuitively know as a security practitioner who is trying to do this in the wild. It's not just about the tool. So speaking of what's going to work, do we even know what works in security? We don't really know. I've tried to do some research into this. How do we get the security outcomes that we would really like? What kind of practices lead to that? But we don't really know. What we do have, or what we have had, are labs that try to test very narrowly scoped use cases to see if a tool does what it says it's going to do. That's not whether it's going to work. It's just whether the tool does what it says it is going to do. We have things like the MITRE ATT&CK testing, and again, they have tried to scope it really, really well because there are so many fringe use cases. So they do a pretty good job of trying to figure out from the use case that they create whether everybody can meet that use case. But in general, there's so many possibilities and so many options. We don't know what actually works. And if we don't know what works and we don't know what it would cost, how do we know whether anybody can afford it? So this is another theme that I am big about, which is why it's so complex for organizations to be able to defend themselves. It's not just budget, although budget is a really big part of it. There's also expertise, which is not training. Expertise is the experience and the skill to know what to do with something that you haven't seen before, which, let's face it, is our life every day in cybersecurity. It's like, that just happened. Okay, what do we do? So the easy answers to this sort of problem are, let's throw money at the problem and let's throw free training at the problem. That is not enough to be able to deal with this. Even if you know what to do, are you able to do it? There's so many constraints in real life environments, things that you can't do anything about. Like the whole idea of fail fast does not work in aviation. Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. With things that we consider to be conventional wisdom, like authentication systems should fail closed. That's not going to happen in a healthcare environment. You cannot keep the doctor from being able to get into the system and help the patient. Lives are at stake. So any authentication system is not going to fail closed in a hospital. There's just no way. Lots of that. Influence. Smaller organizations cannot tell their suppliers to fix something. I would, when I was with state government, I would ask some of my vendors to fix a flaw that we found, and they would say, first of all, well, you're the only one who complained about this, so we're not going to fix it. Or they will say, we will fix it if you pay us to fix it. And so these, most organizations cannot wield the influence to get things fixed that a really large company can do. They can say, we've got a $2 million contract with you. We need you to fix this, and they will go do it. So sometimes gathering these smaller organizations together to wield collective influence, like in the form of an ISAC, sometimes that works, but who's going to speak on behalf of all of the unaffiliated SMBs out there? And then I mentioned, why are we making this an individual responsibility? I was really heartened to see that in the latest National Cybersecurity Strategy document, they talked about rebalancing the responsibility to defend cyberspace, rebalancing it from the small organizations who can't afford it and can't do it to the ones who maybe can afford it. And I think we need to have this discussion more. Why are we asking dentist offices to secure themselves? Why are we asking consumers to make the right decisions on their own and secure themselves? So what can we do differently? Here's where I want to see more research into outcomes, not functionality. Not whether something does what it says it's going to do, whether it does this one thing or it blocks this one thing, but does it work in the overall security strategy to actually reduce incidents? We need to build better incentives, and we need to restrict complexity for critical use cases. We need to stop blaming the victims, and we also need to democratize security. First of all, let's talk about security metrics. When we're talking about outcomes, a lot of people get into metrics, but we don't want to talk about who is compliant at any given time, because compliance is built around managing collective risk around a very well understood and very narrowly scoped use case, like a credit card string. Protecting a credit card string for the purposes of the credit card companies, that can be scoped. It can be made into a list. When you're done. That's really good. But compliance everywhere else for any sort of use case is not the same as security. Not vulnerability counts. Again, those are really easy to tot up and say, oh, you got 10,000 vulnerabilities, or you got 3 kevs, or whatever. That does not address the problem of actually remediating those. Not who files insurance claims. I've seen some presentations from cyber insurance ones who they don't have good actuarial data. I mean, they're starting to collect and try to correlate what kind of controls are correlated with claims being filed by their customers. But that's not who gets breached, that's who decides to file a claim. So that's not really, that's not close enough. Not who gets forced to report a breach, and that's the other problem with this sort of thing. When you have breach regulations, that kind of incentivizes the organization not to look for breaches, because if they don't see them, they don't have to report them. And also, don't measure how much you spend. I really hate that. Everybody says, oh, 10% of IT should go to cybersecurity. I hate that, because what if you have like $2,000? 10% of that is not going to buy you anything. It's great if you are a large organization and your budget is in the billions. I think it's, for the NYPD, the cybersecurity budget is $1.8 billion. I think I remember that. From a talk by Nick Selby. And all of the little regional law enforcement organizations around the US, they don't have that kind of budget. It's like 3 people, and one of them maybe, is the one who deals with the computers in their spare time, I don't know. So the question is, can we measure whether we're winning? Are we winning? So over at Columbia University, Jay Healy, really, really smart guy, gave a presentation to my National Academy of Sciences committee on trying to measure if we are indicators of outcomes. And he talked about a whole lot, but some of the really interesting questions are things like, what might you expect to see if defenders were successfully disrupting adversaries? What would that look like? So you might look at the threat actor operations, like if there's a rapid change in TTPs, they've had to move on really quickly because we react really well, and so it doesn't work for them anymore. They might shift to harder TTPs. They might have to redo their infrastructure. You might see an increase in number and price of O days because it's getting harder to use the traditional, really old vulnerabilities that we still see. Longer attack chains and so on, better attribution. Or if we look at the threat actor ecosystem and their organizations, maybe smaller groups would be driven out of business. Maybe we would see struggles to find new talent, degraded trust between these groups. And those are pretty hard to just tick up by themselves. But he argues that if you put these together, they might, they might give us an indication of whether we are actually winning against these threat actors. Another thing that we need to do is to build better incentives. Right now, incentives will either be driven by public relations. Do we have to report this? Do we not have to report this? How do we deal with our customers if we have a breach? And most organizations are not incentivized to prioritize security over their business objectives, which is reasonable. But we have to find a way to make the incentives as compelling for security as they are for their businesses. Or we change who's incentivized. We say, okay, you're not in charge of this anymore. We're going to put it in charge, we're going to put these people in charge of it because they will be incentivized differently to make this happen successfully. And we want to mitigate externalities, like I talked about the Blackbaud ransomware attack that affected 1,000 organizations. That research that I quoted from Scientia also determined that there was some large number of organizations that were affected by the breach that, even though it wasn't their breach, but they still had to pay the costs of the breach. Again, even though it wasn't their breach, they still had to pay for it. So that's a big problem. And so this sort of thing is social engineering. And again, if you're a red teamer, I'm sorry, not that excited by that kind of social engineering. If you trick somebody into clicking on something, that's not hard. Yeah, that's not hard, Jeff. If you train 1,000 people not to click on links, that's harder. If you manage to design and build a system where it doesn't matter whether they click on a bad link or not, that's even harder. So doing social engineering, getting a group of people like your business departments or whatever to work together with you to secure something, that is real social engineering. The CISOs have the toughest social engineering job. And then take that up a level and try to implement security regionally, or on a statewide basis, or a national basis, or a global basis, trying to figure out how to build in the right economic and business and legal incentives to get a certain effect. That is masterclass social engineering. So I would also encourage you to get into policy because they really need you. Let's restrict the complexity. A lot of people are not going to like this. Right now, we don't have a manufacturing model of software development. We have an artistic model. We have a literary model. We have people are writing their own stuff, and oh, yeah, I know that's out there in open source, but I want to do it my way. I want to do it this way. We maybe have to stop that for critical infrastructure and for anything else that's really critical. We have to say, look, you can't play around with this anymore. I'm sorry. You have to do it this way because this is the way we know it works. whether it is like civil engineering, building codes. Those are, we know it works, you have to do them that way. And so we may have to step forward and say, here's, classes of software that you don't get to reinvent anymore. We don't care if you have a nice new shiny function attached to it. We don't care. We're gonna, you have to use the components that we have already tested and that we know work. And that's gonna make a lot of people sad, because Silicon Valley's all about innovation, and everything has to be new and fast and coming faster and faster, and look at this, and let's sprinkle some AI on everything. But we have to say, look, you gotta stop, okay? Really, dude, you have to stop. Let's stop blaming the victims, because it really comes down to design. And if you recognize this photo, yeah, you get another prize from me. There is so much that has been designed on the assumption that the only people who use it are geeks who already know everything about the underlying technology. We need to be designing better for the broader use cases, so that people don't have to know what they're doing when they use it. They can just use it. So chances are, if something is vulnerable, if it is written in a way where the user can't automatically do the right thing, or they have to work really hard to do the right thing, that is bad design, and we need to get much better at that. And then finally, we need to democratize security. I've talked about this, that security needs to move from a control function to a business function. And there are a lot of organizations, very high discipline environments like the military, where they can still say, look, we gotta, stop cracking me up, Jeff, where this is what you have to do, you must follow this, there will be consequences if you do not follow it, where your employer tells you what to do with their data, or whatever. But if you are, a kid in kindergarten, that sort of control organization is not appropriate. We need to be teaching everybody how security can serve them. What it can do for them, not, oh, well, we told you have to do it this way, so you can't do this. My daughter, when she was younger, came to me, and I never used parental controls. My daughter came to me one day and she said, I need you to help set the parental controls on my phone. And I was like, honey, why? And it turned out she wanted to enforce her own study time. And I said, okay, that's fine. You set it up the way you want to. I will put a password on it that you don't know. And anytime you want to change it, come back to me and I'll put in the password and you can change the settings on it. So she made it serve her, for her purposes, not what I wanted to control about what she was doing. And we have to think about this more, because data does not, and systems do not belong anymore exclusively to employers or military or whatever. It is all there for us to use in the way that seems best to us. And also, I'm sorry, we can't be wizards and muggles anymore. We can't treat users about, like, oh, I can't believe you don't know this. I can't believe you don't understand this. Yeah, we can't, as security professionals, we cannot treat other people condescendingly just because they don't know what we know. I mean, you don't have to, you don't know, you don't see doctors coming to you and, saying to you, how can you not know what your C-reactive protein level is? Sheesh. We got to stop that too. And then finally, again, people may not like this, but I will argue there is no talent shortage in cybersecurity. There are just bad job requirements. There are people who do not understand, thank you. The people who are looking for jobs. Yeah, if an HR department does not know how to assess somebody's background and what they've done, they're going to fall back on a degree or certification or anything that will give them that indicator without having to know that. But as somebody who has no degree herself, and I let my CISSP lapse about 10 years ago, that only helps so much in the hiring process. We have to get better at determining. There are all sorts of people who are really good, can be very good at cybersecurity. Next time you're on the subway, you're on a bus, just talk to the person next to you and see how they understand security principles. A lot of them, intuitively do. When I was working for a Swiss bank and I was promoted to director, I was given a personal assistant because that came with the position, and I didn't even hire her. She just showed up one day. But she was so smart and hardworking and clever and everything. I said, I don't need a personal assistant, so I put her in charge of my access control group. That was 25-ish years ago, and today, last I looked, she was running a group of global CISOs for Standard Chartered Bank. So she did the rest herself. I just, put her at the beginning of the shoot, and she just, did everything else herself. Lots of people can intuitively understand, once you give them time to think about it, what the security principles are that we need in order to design good security. Sometimes it's your kid who's trying to get around your firewall. They learn how to be a hacker that way. Okay, that's good, but it's better if you co-opt them and say, help me solve this problem. And once you include them in that, they will get better. So yes, if you are really bringing in people with potential, or you're developing employees within your organization, training them, all of us have to learn this stuff. Every day we are at the same starting line, running off to try to figure out the next big problem or the next bunch of little problems that haven't been solved yet. So we are all learning. Pick people who know how to learn, not necessarily the ones who worked with Windows NT. Nobody cares about that anymore. So what you can do is question all the assumptions. It doesn't matter what position you're in or where you are in your career, or if you're a student, question assumptions and going, why are we still doing this if it's not working? Maybe that's an indicator that we shouldn't be doing this way. Also, share your knowledge, whatever knowledge you have, and share the responsibility. Encourage and recruit people around you to help make security decisions. One of the best things that you can do is not just do diversity and equity and inclusion. That's just inviting somebody into the conference room. You want to help them learn leadership by saying to them, somebody comes up with an idea and you say, okay, let's try their idea. And we'll put them in charge of, if you have any questions, go to this person when you're trying to do this. Help them start to lead, even if they're not in a leadership position, because again, we all have to learn this to, at some point. When I was first promoted to a manager, it was a surprise to me. They just announced it in a reorg presentation. And I had to turn to my colleagues and say, I'm sorry, I didn't know. But I did not have any management training. I had to figure out what I was doing, and I made a lot of mistakes. But everybody should have a chance to learn what it is to lead, no matter where they come from. And especially, their background may contribute a lot to understanding the problems that you're trying to solve. And then finally, you need to stop listening to me, because I am old enough that I may have created some of these problems, or the people I worked with may have created some of these problems. We're not necessarily the right people to lead you back out of them. So I'm going to hand this over to the rest of you to take over here, because it's in your hands. I'm tired. It's in your hands. And hopefully we will get to that hallowed place where we can play security on easy mode. Now, I hope I've prepped you adequately for this long day of opportunities, that you're all ready to seize them. Are you ready? Yes. Are you ready? Yes. Well, then let's go.